Now, let's try and imagine a day. Let's look off into the future and let's do a thought experiment. Imagine that atheists are victorious and Christianity and theism is wiped off the face of the earth and anti-theists win. Woohoo! Yeah, there's no more Stephanie and I to kick around anymore. There's no one left to persecute because we aren't there. Now, you, the atheist, will be charged with coming up with the coherent theory of atheism. And you can't cop out. You can't go, you're the one making a positive claim, Craig. Like I said, I'm not there. That's why I started. I'm not there. There's no atheists left to kick around. You're the one making a positive claim, Craig. I'm not making a positive claim, nor is Stephanie. We aren't in this new world where there's no more theism. Now, you, the atheist, are charged with coming up with a unified theory, a coherent theory of atheism, which, as we talked about in other videos, if you have the physics, which are the facts, then you have the philosophy, which has to correspond to the physics, or the philosophy is mistaken. Philosophy has to be consistent in three key areas. Is it parsimonious, logically coherent? Does it have explanatory power? Then you have your starting points, which is your metaphysical a priori assumptions about the world, and they have to line up with all the data points. And all of this has to cohere and make sense. Herein lies the problem if you are the atheist, and you are charged with coming up with the coherent theory of atheism without a theism to say, well, that's just not true. That's just not true. They don't have any evidence for that. You can't do that. Why? Because we aren't there. The problem is, and I think it's a really big problem, I don't think it can be done. Even if you get rid of theism, theism will reassert itself. Why? Because the problem is embedded into the nature of reality itself. You, the atheist, would now be charged with trying to come up with the coherent theory of atheism, which entails and allows for transcendent categories. At least math and a bunch of others. Can it be done? I don't think so. If it can be done, it would have already been done. This is what I've been trying to point out. There was a line of philosophical thought going all the way back to the days of Hume, wherein a certain type of skeptical person, philosopher, already tried to come up with the coherent theory about the world. If you don't like the coherent theory of atheism, come up with the coherent theory about the world, wherein you reconcile the idea that there isn't a God to the similar idea that there are transcendent, invisible, immaterial, abstract objects other than matter and motion that exist and occur. And you can't get rid of them. Why? Because we've already explained this in other videos. You cannot do science without math. You have to assume the mathematical axiom in order to use the mathematical axiom. That's not my proof. That's Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and that's a proof. Ergo, you cannot eliminate it. You cannot eliminate the transcendental categories. So if you're charged with coming up with a coherent theory about the world that can be reconciled to atheism, I say good luck with that. The two best atheist philosophers today that I know of, anyways, are Thomas Nagel and Eric S. Reinhardt. And they are both trying to do that to one degree or another, and they both recognize the problem. And I don't think it can be done. I don't think it can be reconciled. Eric S. Reinhardt calls himself a Platonic atheist. A Platonic atheist, which means he believes in the world of the forms. See, one of the things that atheists will tell you when they're critiquing religion, so they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. What if they all say the exact same thing, which they do? Every religion, bar none, believes in one degree or another in some form of the forms. I mean the Platonic forms. They all religions, all religious things, all religious ideas say this. They all agree on this. There is an invisible, immaterial, transcendent world that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. They all say that. On that they all agree. The only thing they're debating is what form do these forms take. If you're a polytheist, you think it's polysemous. If you're a monotheist, you think it could be a Jesus or an Allah, or you think it's just some sort of energy like a Taoist. But all of them agree that there's an invisible, immaterial, transcendent world that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. And here's the kicker if you're an atheist. There is, as provable fact, there is, as provable fact. That is why the best atheist philosopher today, Eric S. Reinhardt, calls himself a Platonic atheist. An atheist who believes in a transcendent, immaterial, invisible realm that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. Why is he not a theist? I don't know. Why isn't he calling that God? I'm not sure. Are we just talking about words? Don't know. But that is the one atheist who's nailing it. He understands actually what is at stake, and he understands the issues. And he's coming up with a very coherent theory of atheism, or a very coherent theory about how, where everything lines up properly. You have your physics, which are the facts, lined up with your metaphysical a priori assumptions about the world. With your philosophy, which is interpretive framework, where it all fits nicely into a pretty little package. But embedded in his epistemic holism, his very holistic approach, which accounts for almost everything, is still a transcendent, immaterial, invisible realm. The fact that he's not calling it God doesn't, so what? He's not, I didn't call it God, Greg, I understand. I'm an atheist, so I didn't call it God. But he's still allowing for something that is, in essence, theism. That's my point. I don't think it can be done, because we know the transcendental categories are there. As I've explained, I think, thoroughly enough in other videos. They already tried to get rid of them. That's the whole point of a certain type of human skepticism. We devalue the transcendental categories. We devalue metaphysics. Why? Those things aren't there. Those are speculative in nature. They couldn't do it with logic and math, or they would do it with logic and math. Why? Because, as I said, you cannot do science without math. And you have to assume the mathematical axiom in order to use the mathematical axiom. So math is embedded into the fundamental nature of reality as we currently understand it, and it cannot be eliminated. And math is the gateway to other forms of the forms. There are other transcendental categories that cannot be eliminated. There's 12 according to Kant. As I said, this was already covered. Kant recognized the challenge laid down by Hume. He even said, Hume awoke me from my dogmatic slumber, but he resurrected the transcendental categories in response to Humean skepticism, wherein Hume was the first person who wrote the first self-burning book. It's a self-burning book. The famous line at the end of, I think it's whatever it's called, verse Hume on concerning human understanding. I forget the exact title of the book offhand. But the famous line at the end of it is, it just contains metaphysics and pure sophistry, throw that book onto the fire. Okay, so take his own book and throw it onto the fire. Why? Because you cannot, logical positivism was this line of thinking taken to its ultimate conclusion. This is what those type of philosophers were already doing. And most of the atheists that you encounter in today's world are still logical positivists. They still are. They haven't changed from that basic paradigm of reality. You say, when they say, do you have evidence, they mean empirical. That's it. It's the only thing that counts for them. And they agree, if you put up the statements of the logical positives, put them on Twitter. I've said this in other videos. If you started a sock account, pretend you were an atheist, and took the statements of the Vienna Circle and just threw some of them, the only thing, if it can't be empirically verified for, I don't even want to know about it. They'd all amen it, they'd all retweet it, you'd get 1,000 likes. Why? Because most of your atheists are logical positivists. They just don't know. Why? Because they don't know the philosophy. And they're scientismists and they're materialists. Once you eliminate the two building blocks, scientism and materialism, the reason why it's somewhat of a challenge is because everybody in our society, to one degree or another, including most theists, if you grew up in a town and went to public school, and you went to a normal college, guess what? You were a materialist and a scientismist too. Why? Because they planted it in everybody. That's why you see someone like Sarah Silviander, who, as far as I can tell, is a first-rate scientist, who's always a little bit defensive on Twitter. Why? Because she knows. You get the sense as a theist that you are swimming upstream. Why? Because they planted two metaphysical a priori assumptions about the world in every single one of you listening to this, including me. Everyone who was raised in a normal suburb went to a normal school. Materialism and scientism were planted inside of all of us. For the last 150 years, that's what our society has been teaching. As a foregone conclusion, as truth. Both of those positions are false. Look at how we handled the pandemic, if you don't believe me. Did you hear people say, we need to just look at the science? Okay, that's scientism in a nutshell. That's scientism in action. What does that even mean? We need to look at the science. I understand what someone vaguely means by that, but what does that actually mean? The science says this. The science doesn't speak. The science doesn't speak as a unified whole. That's scientism. It's the idea that we're done with philosophy and science is some sort of catch-all. There's a lot of different ways of defining scientism, but it's basically the idea, and it's born out of logical positivism. It's a stepchild of logical positivism, that we're done with philosophy, we're done with metaphysics, and science is this sort of catch-all understanding of the world that means clear philosophy, clear understanding, clear metaphysics, science, science, science. We just need to look at the science. We just need to follow the science. The science doesn't speak as a unified whole. Okay, there's no such thing as the science. I get that people are using it as a vague phrase, but it underscores a point. We all have been trained to be materialist and scientism to one degree or another. And it is clouding this dialogue. That day is coming to an end. Why? Because materialism is false and scientism is false. The reason why materialism gains so much ground is because of Humean skepticism. There was the idea of just investigating the empirical facts as an avenue to truth, okay, produces a lot of truth. It gives you a lot of insight into the nature of reality. As I said, physical scientists, reductive physicalism was astonishingly successful for a really simple reason, because almost everything can be easily reduced to just its physical properties. And from that, you can derive a lot of information about how the world works. From that was born the scientific revolution. So the metaphysic, the philosophy most closely associated with the success of empiricism, with the success of the physical sciences, has been materialism. And it isn't until very recently, well, it's not very, only very few people along the way have noticed that it's false. Now it's becoming absolutely untenable. Why? Because it's really obviously can't account for the data points. But for the longest time, it was most closely associated with the success of the sciences. So, as I've said, a metaphysical a priori assumption is something you can carry around in you and not even know it's there. It's something somebody else plants inside of you, and you give it to yourself by inference. Your society, you pick it up from the atmosphere of your society. Your society teaches it, but nobody ever explicitly says it to you. Nobody ever told us when we were 15, by the way, materialism is true. They just sort of presupposed it when they were teaching us the physical sciences. So we sort of presupposed it ourselves. Do you understand? That's how metaphysical a prioris work. They're not explicitly taught to you. Sometimes they are, but rarely. So another example that I've used in the past is a young earth creationist. Okay, once you have young earth creationism planted in you as a way of viewing the world, it automatically makes you process information differently than someone who didn't start out with that starting point. Ditto for a physicalist. That's why it's hard to argue with the young earth creationists, even if they're intelligent. Sometimes the more intelligent they are, the harder it is to get them to see. Why? Because they can come up with good justifications, ad hoc rationalizations, as most people notice when they try to argue with certain types of Christians. So what are they doing? They are processing the information differently than you and I. I was not taught to be a young earth creationist. I was raised pretty much secular, taught science just like everybody else, 15 years old, right? So when they told me the earth was billions of years old, I didn't hesitate to believe it. The young earth creationist starts with the starting point. And the reason why it's so hard to get them off of it is because they think it is synonymous with Christianity. Nobody told them that. They've presupposed it because that's what the community presupposed. Sometimes people told them that, but not usually. So they walk around with this firmly embedded metaphysical a priori assumption about the world, and it makes them devalue all evidence to the contrary, and the slim supporting evidence in favor of the position they automatically, make more prominent in their mind. So it's really hard to convince them. Why? Because they automatically devalue things contrary to the position. The physicalist materialist does the same thing. That's why it's hard to get them to understand the hard problem of consciousness. Why? Because they start out with physicalism as their metaphysical a priori assumption about the world, and it corresponds to their view of reality because that's what they were taught in science classes, and that's what's been hammered into them. So they automatically overvalue the arguments in favor of physicalism when we're talking about philosophy of mind, by a lot, even though those arguments are really weak and really unconvincing. They don't notice that. Why? Because they match with their foregone conclusion, their starting point. That's why I keep saying metaphysical a priori assumptions are the entirety of the ballgame. And we don't really have to work that hard. Why? Because the ones that undergird the Western civilization right now, today, are crumbling. Scientism and materialism are false positions. Once those two building blocks go, a lot of atheists are going to disappear along with them. A lot of atheists are going to disappear along with them. The reason why atheism is common at all. Think of world historical terms. If you're an atheist, just relax. This isn't a contest. I don't really care. I'm just telling you the truth. Okay? You don't have to challenge me in stupid ways like a lot of you always usually do. Right, crap. I didn't even listen to your video, Craig, but I'm gonna argue with you about bullcrap. Don't do this, please. It's really tiring and it's wasting both of our times. If I say to you, stop wasting my time, guess what I mean? Stop wasting my time. You're not even listening to the video. You're not worth talking to. Dr. Matthew Hunt looking right at you. Guy says, I don't even think, I put it in quotes, which would indicate that it was a quote from a song. She goes, I don't think you did. You can go back and look 2 tweets ago. It's in quotes. Does he even bother looking tweet? I don't know. A lot of times, this isn't true of every atheist. Eventually I'm going to stop caveating this all the time. Everybody understands that who listens to my video. But certain type of atheists who just argue with you for the sake of arguing. They don't investigate what you're talking about. They barely listen to the videos. They're not worth talking to. And if you're one of those atheists, please don't comment. Why? Not interested in your opinion at all. You don't listen, you don't understand, you don't know science. Period. You're not worth talking to. You're an imbecile who thinks you're smart. I promise. Dr. Matthew Hunt, you happen to be intelligent, which makes your poor reasoning really, really egregious. It should embarrass you. And you're poor, you'll say whatever you want just to try and win an argument. Stupid and childish. You should stop doing it. All of you should stop doing it. Why? It's a total incomplete and utter waste of time. Now, getting back to the issue at hand. This is the one that sometimes triggers out atheists. It shouldn't trigger you if you're an honest person, guys. Materialism and scientism are the two building blocks of our society. They're what is taught to people in universities. It's what everyone got as their starting point. Everyone, including theists. Theists just have counter narratives. But they were planted in us too if we took regular school classes. They are both false positions. They are both false positions. You cannot do science without philosophy at all. That's an incoherent concept. My philosophy is we're done with philosophy. It's just science, science, science. That is an incoherent idea. That is a self-refuting idea, and that is scientism in a nutshell. And it's really common in today's world. Otherwise, nobody would have said in the pandemic, we just need to listen to the science. That's an incoherent statement. I understand what people meant by it, but at root, it's an incoherent statement. Science doesn't speak as a unified whole. You get it? Now, those two starting points are going to disappear. And as I'm almost positive, so will a lot of atheists along with them. Why? Because that's the reason why atheism is common at all. You go back to certain times and places in history, there was no such thing as an atheist. That's why when I was talking about the default position, it seems somewhat illogical to even call it a default position. Why? Because there were times and places in the history of this world where there was no such thing. How could it possibly be the starting point of a human being? Then they'll give you some mumbo jumbo like you have to be taught a claim, blah, blah, blah. That's all bull crap from atheist land, guys. Stop that crap. Why? It's stupid and misleading. Stupid is the key. It's really stupid stuff. It's just you trying to score fake points and waste everybody's time. Most of you need to just shut up and listen. Why? Because you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. None. Zero. And it shows. You embarrass yourself with the things you say, and you should stop. Why? Because there's no point in discussing things with you. See this 100 times a day. I don't even engage in these conversations. Listen to the answers from Reason Guy and shut your foolish mouth. Why? Because they're right on the stuff that they talk about. Listen to them and shut up. Listen to them and shut your mouth. Why? I don't want to hear from you. You're a good chance you're a moron. And if you're not a moron, it's even worse for you. Now, why... The reason why atheism is common at all is that those two starting points naturally entail, they logically and automatically produce atheism inside of somebody. They are the building blocks of atheism, scientism and materialism. Both of those are false positions and they're going to be decimated in the years to come. As I've explained with the physics. Okay, this isn't up for debate, guys. Nobody's ever challenged me on this because it's basically true. Materialism is over, quantum mechanics decimated in 1925. The reason why they've been slow to adapt to that is because they didn't have this exact same time where science as a whole started saying we're done with philosophy. They even teach it in separate branches in universities nowadays. You take physics, you don't have to take philosophy. But philosophically, it's not all that hard, complicated to understand quantum mechanics. It's really not. Relational quantum mechanics is going to be the dominant strain, is the most parsimonious, makes the most sense of the data points. The reason why it's so slow to catch on is it annihilates materialism as a candidate option. As I've said, it goes something like this. You take a physics class at college, the first thing they're going to teach you as soon as you step into that classroom, the particle, prior to measurement, the particle exists in a wave of probability. Then they'll say, that's so trippy and mysterious, it's so trippy and mysterious. Why is that so trippy and mysterious? Because as far as we understand, in our understanding of a wave of probability, a probability has not occurred yet. If I say there's a 30% chance of rain tomorrow, that hasn't happened yet. And that sort of annihilates our understanding of how the world actually works, but it need not. If I ask you, where's Germany? The question cannot be answered absent a reference point. Do you understand that? If I say, where's Germany? There's no such thing as an answer absent a reference point to relate it to. So you say, where's Germany relative to what? You look at a map, Germany is here, relative to France there, and Italy there. That makes sense, right? You understand that? If I ask you, how fast is a train going? If I ask you a question about velocity, the question cannot be answered absent a reference point. How fast is a train going, traveling over the land relative to the Earth? Velocity requires a reference point in order to make coherent sense. Now I ask you a question about a particle. Same principle. It's not all that trippy, complicated, mysterious, and weird. We just never thought of the real material world as unfolding this way. Where is the particle cannot be answered absent a reference point. So you plug in a reference point and the question is easy. The particle is here relative to an observer there, or here relative to a measuring device there. Not that complicated, not that trippy, not that mysterious. Why is it, oh my God, my head's going to fall off with quantum mechanics? Because it shattered the preconceived metaphysical a priori assumption about how the world works, which was materialism. And it's the one they've been teaching round the clock in the scientific communities. And even to this day, it's a boogeyman you can't walk away from. The reason why Carlo Rovelli does not come out and say it is because I don't think he has the liberty to. The reason why Bernardo Castro writes books saying materialism is over, the end of materialism, because he's not getting paid by science anymore. He's a philosopher, makes his money as a YouTuber and an author. So he is at liberty to trash all the conventional-minded thinking about scientists to his heart content. If you are a scientist on a university, you cannot not be a materialist. Why? You will lose your grant. It's too controversial of an opinion. Why? Materialism is the truth. Ask Sean Carroll. Yes, I'm a physicalist. Why? Because I'm a scientist. He thinks they're synonymous, just like the young earth creationist does. And the reason why it's so deeply embedded is because they have mistaken the wood for the trees. They have mistaken the success of the sciences, which is rooted in empiricalism and methodological naturalism, which is closely associated with materialism, for the success of materialism, even though materialism is false. Materialism is false, I just told you how. The world is different than the scientists thought going into the 20th century. The metaphysics that undergird reality are different than materialism. I told you, I've said this 1,000 times, if the choice is binary between idealism and materialism, idealism wins hands down. Now, there may be a more precise metaphysic or philosophy that comes up in the meantime that is in between the two, materialism plus transcendental categories or something like that. So I'm not ruling out the possibility that someone will come up with something that better explains the data points. But materialism is insufficient. It fails. It fails. And when it fails, there's be a paradigm shift in science that will be profound. Be, in essence, a new Copernican revolution. Why? Because they've been dealing with materialism as if we live in a mechanistic world for the past 200 years. It's why there are atheists. Prior to the last 50 to 100 years, atheism was a really rare presupposition. Really rare. Now it's relatively common. Still pretty rare, but way more common than it used to be. Why? Because we're all been taught to be materialists and scientismists. And those two building blocks naturally produce atheism. And those two building blocks are going to come down. Then it will be the charge of the person who says there is no God, or there's not a God, or I don't believe in God, or I just lack a belief, whatever you want to say, don't care, to come up with a coherent theory of the world. The problem for the atheist is going to be your coherent theory of reality is going to have to automatically presuppose or assume transcendental categories, why they are there, and their preconditions of intelligibility. The presuppers are right about that. The sense-making apparata are located in the transcendent realm. They're not located in the material world. That is the failure of logical positivism. It said that the material, it's an attempt to be positive, that's where positive comes from, about what we're investigating. Why? Because we can root it all in empirical sciences. Empirical sciences can tell us the facts, but there's matter and motion. Those are the facts. But there's matter and motion and transcendent other than matter and motion. That is a fact too. And that needs to be accounted for in any coherent theory of atheism. And I do not think it can be done. I don't think it can be done. Good luck with that. The two best guys in your squad by far are working on it as we speak. Eric S. Reinhardt and Thomas Nagel. Those are the two best people on your team, by far. And they're working on it as we speak, trying to come up with a coherent theory of atheism that entails transcendent, immaterial, invisible, other than matter and motion. Good luck with that. Why? Can't you hear how that's going to be a challenge or not? I just told you. It's the entire predicate of every world religion, every religion you've ever heard of. What? There's an invisible, immaterial, transcendent realm that undergirds, interacts with the known visible material world. There is. Period. The only thing we are arguing about, the most successful, the most intelligent, the most far-thinking and clear-headed atheist philosopher calls himself an atheist, but he also calls himself a Platonist. I see those two positions as ultimately irreconcilable. He doesn't, but I think they are. You get it now? He doesn't. He thinks those are normal, that they can fit together. I don't think that they can. I think he's already allowing for something that he's not calling God, but in fact is mostly what people refer to as God. So we'll see. Now, this isn't all that relevant. Why? Because we got a digital physics argument coming down the pike that's 100 times better than anything any atheist is ever going to be able to deal with. So game is over. Game's over. Sorry. Jig is up. I did it. Stephanie, we did it. Woo! We did it. We're going to prove the Sky Fairy because it's not going to be all that hard. Everything I just told you is the God's honest truth. Yes, I was a little ranty in this video. Yeah, I understand. You ranted a lot, Craig. I understand. It's Craig Reed video. It's early Saturday morning. I haven't even had my full coffee yet. I had to get up and rant at my cell phone for 30 minutes. I'm getting better at making these videos shorter. I'm trying to keep these videos short. 50 minutes is a lot. Even to hear my beautiful, resonant, beautiful voice, I understand that's asking a lot of the audience. So trying to make these videos shorter, even though once I get rolling, this is the part where I actually start kicking in and start having fun. Prior to that, I'm just, yammering away about whatever I felt like talking about. So those are the facts, Jack. I really think, 50 years from now, looking down ahead, materialism is going to go away. There's going to be a new metaphysic, idealism, or something in between materialism and idealism, and that new metaphysic is going to make there a lot less atheists just automatically. Why? Because the starting point isn't going to be the same. The reason why it seems like the Christians are on the back heels is two reasons. First of all, a lot of atheists try and make it, I'm making a positive claim, Craig. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I tell you about the claim of why I have God belief. It's not a positive claim. It's not a faith position. It's an experiential claim. I've explained my religious experiences in other videos. You can go listen to them. It's not a positive claim. I tell you exactly what my faith is predicated on, religious experience. That's not a faith claim. So if I tell you that lavender oil makes me feel tired, that's not a faith claim. That's a claim about what I'm actually experiencing. My religious experience claims are the exact same thing. They aren't, maybe they're positive claims, but they aren't faith claims. But that's irrelevant. That's why I did the thought experiment. We're now in a world where there's no more theism, and an atheist is charged with coming up with a coherent theory of atheism, or a coherent theory about the world, if you prefer, that entails atheism. And they're still going to have to allow for transcendental categories, which are by definition contradictory to atheism. That's my point. It still has to allow for transcendental categories. Why? Because the logical positives failed. The sense-making apparatus are located in the transcendent realm. That's fact. So you have to come up with a coherent theory of the world as an atheist that entails transcendental categories. Transcendental categories historically and philosophically, we got two atheists working on something different, but historically, philosophically, have always been associated closely or parcel of a thing called theism. Why? Because it's pretty obvious. Immaterial, invisible, transcendent, other than matter and motion. It's actually there. You're not calling it God. Why not? I'm calling it God, Craig. Okay, fine. Why not? I don't care what you call it. Why not? That's what I'm saying. You know, but I'm not calling it God, so it can't be God. Okay, so what are you calling it? You know? Call it the invisible flying spaghetti monster. It's still part and parcel of the reality of the world that we inhabit. That's my point. Can't be done away with. No, it's there as provable fact. So, you know, we'll see. If anyone can do it, it'll be Thomas Nagel and it'll be Eric S. Reinhardt. Those are the two best atheist philosophers that I've found by far. No one else is even close. I promise, those are the two best. At least as far as I'm concerned. You know, Alex Malpass is pretty good. But those are the two best by far in terms of they're coming up with their own way of thinking about things. Eric S. Reinhardt is a very original thinker. He even has he may even believe in life after death as an atheist. I haven't found where I've only heard him allude to that. I haven't really found where he's talks about that. So that'll be somewhere in videos to come if I find out what he means by that. Thought that was pretty interesting. So there you have it, kids. Again, you know, it's not going to be all that complicated. I was a little bit sloppy in this video. Didn't quite hit on all the bases, but I can't keep doing that and making videos under half an hour. So, you know, the video's great as it was. Thanks, Joe. The video's great. I understand. So there you have it, kids. That is all for now. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.